So I'm actually going to be talking about this man, largely talking about this man here, is a man called Benjamin Constant. You've already heard there's been already one reference to Constant in the earlier talk by Mark. And in fact, what I'm going to say fits in quite well, I think, with what Mark was saying. Many of you won't know who Constant was. He was born in Lausanne in 1767. He was a Protestant, which is very important. Educated at the University of Edinburgh, oddly. Arrived in Paris around 1795, was then still enthusiastic about the French Revolution. Enthusiasm wanes. Napoleon comes to power. Basically, he spends the years of Napoleon's empire either in internal or external exile, and then comes afterwards, and this is what I want to talk about, to try and explain these 20 years of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Empire. And he does so famously, now famously, it wasn't so famous until recently, an essay, a speech, which compares the liberty of the ancients to that of the moderns, and that was given in 1819. So that's essentially what I'm going to be talking about, is Constant's analysis of this period. Context, well, the context is important. I want a broader context, and that is this, that as many of you know, in the 18th century in particular, there was this emerging idea, which becomes almost like the dominant idea, that Europe was moving ever more towards an age of commerce, where trade would replace war as the way in which individuals and societies would interact with each other. Lots and lots of examples of this. The stadial theory of civilization, which you get in Adam Smith, is one of the classic formulations, namely that we had now moved to the fourth stage of civilization, which was the age of commerce. As Scottish Enlightenment is full of this sort of thing. But also something like Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws, written earlier, where it is confidently assumed that we are living in an age of commerce and, quote, as a general rule, commerce will produce gentle mores and will lead to peace. So this is a sort of sustaining sort of view of the period. That confidence that you find in Montesquieu, Smith, etc., was rather difficult to sustain in the wake of what happened in the 1789, or the Revolutionary Wars which followed 1789, and of course the Napoleonic Wars, which between them effectively condemned Europe to a period of war for about 20 years, and furthermore, war on a sort of scale, the like of which had not been seen. Now, what more can we say about this? Well, the lecture, essentially the lecture which Constant gives is essentially designed to say, explain this and draw some important conclusions from it. And I just want to take you through the argument of that lecture very, very briefly. And if I'm good, I shall actually gain some time back, actually, in a bit of luck. So the essay is called, the speech is called Liberty of the Ancients Compared to that of the Moderns. By the ancients, essentially, he's talking largely about Greece, to a certain extent Rome. And his argument is essentially that in Greece, in Athens in particular, there existed a certain form of liberty, which, as we've actually heard already today, focused upon the right to participate in decision-making, the decision-making process of society, to decide on issues for citizens, to decide on issues of war and peace, and to vote on laws. And Constant describes this as a form of collective liberty. However, in that conception of collective liberty was a countenancing of, as he puts it, the complete subjection of the individual to the community. That's to say, all private actions were subject to surveillance, there was no individual independence, no freedom of opinion. Above all, when he was a Protestant, there was no freedom of religious observance. This society, he tells us, rested upon three things. First of all, that societies were small, face-to-face societies, therefore you could have direct democracy. They were built around the activity of war, and of course, they rested on the institution of slavery. Now, with regard to modern conceptions of liberty, we're talking about something very, very different indeed. Why? Well, we tell us we now live in large states, not small states. We, in line with the prevailing view, we achieve our aims through commerce and trade rather than war, and of course slavery no longer exists, especially among European nations. What are the consequences of that? Well, he says, as a consequence of this living in an age of trade, commerce, etc., not war, all of us have developed what he calls a vivid love of individual independence. We've also learned, to our cost, that governments on the whole do things incompetently and expensively. So what then is modern liberty? It's based around the idea that individuals possess rights, of course, and those rights are those which allow us to engage in activities of our own choosing, mundane things like being able to travel without constraint, to choose the career we want to pursue, to practice our religion, again, very, very important for him, dispose and even abuse our own property. It's quite clear on that. It's my property. If I want to abuse it, I can do. No one else can own it. And generally be free from the fear of arbitrary government. And fear, of course, is crucial to this idea of what modern despotism is going to be, and also to be free from the oppressive intervention of government. And so he tells us, he says, our freedom must consist of peaceful enjoyment and private independence. So there is two conceptions of liberty. How did this enable him to answer this question of, in a sense, what had gone wrong in France since the Revolution? Well, the first thing is to say there that, like most people, Constant actually did believe that, in a sense, the first revolutionaries, at least, had the best of intentions. They generally did wish to set people free, but that had not occurred. So that's the question. What went wrong? Well, the answer is, in the sense that the French revolutionaries failed to understand that what we wanted was modern liberty. They thought we wanted, in a sense, ancient liberty. And what the French revolutionaries tried to do was impose this ancient conception of liberty upon moderns. In a sense, the two did not fit. The two would not go together. In other words, they attempted to impose a conception of collective liberty over people who prized now individual liberty, freedom to trade, and all of those sorts of things. And what he says is that when that attempt to impose collective liberty failed, that is, in a sense, is when the revolution was forced to adopt no other alternative but that resort to terror, coercion, execution, mass murder, and so on and so forth. So the big mistake of the revolution, and we know, and one can question a lot of the historical detail about what Constant is saying, but we know that the French revolutionists did actually want to make their fellow French citizens into Spartans, dressed up as in this way, and all of that sort of stuff, and that's the way they saw things. So that was a great mistake. So, what's the conclusion? What appears to be the conclusion? Well, very simple. He says, since we live in modern times, he says, I want a liberty suited to modern times, and if we have that, we'll avoid the sort of coercion, terror, and so on that we've witnessed. And what that basically meant was that it had to be recognised that governments had no right to unlimited power over their citizens. Moreover, he says, it's not a question, therefore, of attacking the holders of power. What we should be thinking about doing is attacking power itself. And so it's just changing the people who can possess this power isn't good enough. We have to develop a different conception of sovereignty. And of course, what he's aiming at there in particular is a Rousseauian idea of sovereignty. So that's in a sense, that's his answer to what goes wrong in the French Revolution. They try to impose a concept of collective liberty. We are moderns. We live in an age of commerce, trade, etc., etc. We want a different type of liberty, freedom of religion, freedom to trade, all of those sorts of things. Now, is that the end of the story? Well, it's not the end of the story, despite what Isaiah Berlin, the Paganini of political theory, as he was once described by Michael Oakeshott, despite what Isaiah Berlin might tell you in his famous essay. Why is it not the end of the story? Well, and we've already had hints of this in what we've heard today, Constant saw that modern liberty itself contained its own dangers. And those dangers were that we would be so consumed by our desire for private independence, repose, etc., personal enjoyment, that we would, almost by accident and by neglect, turn ourselves away from the public, in a sense, the public realm. The public realm would cease to be important for us. And Constant points out that, of course, is precisely what governments want. They want us to do that, because that, in a sense, opens up things for them. Now, okay, so where does Bonaparte come into it? Well, he's got to have an analysis, obviously, of Bonapartism as well. Well, first of all, of course, given his belief in trade and so on, Bonapartism is seen as an anachronism. It's a sort of, it's a going back into the past. But it also sees it as a new form of despotism, a form of usurpation. And what I think he says here is very important, because he looks at the internal, the domestic impact of Napoleon's regime. What are its characteristics? Well, centralisation of power, the imposition of uniformity upon the French population, the attempt to destroy all the independent institutions of civil society. Has this magnificent phrase that it says the ambition was to reduce individuals to atoms on a levelled plane, a vast levelled plane. That's what he thinks is the ambition. This is a regime, we've already touched about this, already mentioned this, which of course corrupts all of those that are engaged in it, in its operations, but also corrupts us as well, because it turns us, some of that point about hypocrites, someone said the reference to hypocrites. To survive, we have to become hypocrites. We have to lie to ourselves, etc., etc. But there's something else he notices about this regime, and to my knowledge, he's virtually the first person to say this. If you read Montesquieu's description of despotism, it's rule by fear. Rule by fear reduces you to silence. Constant says, no, what's different about this new form of government that we now see emerging? It's not content to leave you silent. It demands of you that you assent to it. You have to put up your hand and say, I agree, I'm with this, I'm prepared to serve. As he puts it, it pursues individuals to the inner sanctuary of their conscience. That's what this new form of despotism is all about. So this is something new. It's far more powerful as a state than anything we've seen before. So, in brief, what in a sense is the answer to the question, and this is where people do get it wrong. Yes, he wants a liberty for modern times, etc., but the crucial thing is that we have, as he puts it, to learn to bring those two forms of liberty together. He says, so far from renouncing either of the two sorts of liberty, it is necessary to learn to combine the two together. And how is that done? Well, again, I think this relates to a lot of the points that Mark made earlier on. The genius of course, modern politics is we don't have to have direct democracy, but we can get over that through representative democracy. It's through representative democracy that we can have accountability. It's through a free press that governments can be subject to criticism, etc., etc., etc. But he also recognises the importance of political liberty, engaging in the public sphere as a way, in the sense of teaching us what liberty is and what being a good citizen is. He wants us to become engaged citizens. And again, following on from the point I think was made by Mark, he thinks it's absolutely crucial that our institutions, quote, achieve the moral education of citizens. Again, the idea that Mark's idea of possibly paying people to vote would be in line with that. So, there are your two conceptions of liberty. They help him explain what, in a sense, has gone terribly wrong. The undergraduate in Isaiah Berlin will tell you, therefore he just comes down on modern liberty. Not true. He thinks we've got to, instead, somehow combine those two things together. three quick conclusions. What this does, it provides a liberal agenda which has been built on subsequently by people like Alexis de Tocqueville and right on to the sort of writers about social capital, etc. This is the sort of origin of that idea. In my view, those insights into the nature of Bonapartism provide a diagnosis that can be applied to nearly all excursions into dictatorship and totalitarianism ever since. But thirdly, he warns us that we should not allow power to substitute itself for society and not allow society to substitute itself for the individual. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy, Constant has been described as a libertarian as well. I read a quotation when it says, "Nothing good comes out of government, rather the opposite."
Yes.
Is that the right way to describe him? Or?
Years ago, I went to a Liberty Fund conference on Tocqueville, thinking I'd be amongst friends and people would be all big fans of Tocqueville. Immediately, a libertarian, came in and said of Tocqueville he was not a liberal, not a libertarian. And I said, well, who is? And he said, the later Constant. And Bastiat, Frederick Bastiat, he said, the later Constant. That quotation comes, in fact, from his commentary on the work of Filangieri, which is him at his most libertarian. Yeah. Constant was not one of the criticisms of Constant. If you go to Paris and see his grave in the Père Lachaise cemetery, there's a little joke. It has two words. It says "toujours constant." It was not constant. And that's why his reputation was so badly damaged, because he did change his position along the way.
And thank you for pointing out the dangers of collective liberty and also too much individual liberty. We have to have a certain balance, which could be a lesson for today as also. So thank you very much.